path of work that Thomas was alluding to, where you can actually start drilling into things at a regional location perspective, and that's where I think the use of the LEAP approach is a really critical component to applying that within the recommendations framework. So I just want to highlight, I think for me the most important aspect of looking at what TNFD aligned reporting looks like right now, go to our website, because there are we know of about 55 organizations globally, and linked to being a doctor, you actually sign up to when you're going to publicly report. It helps you understand how global organizations across different sectors are actually applying regionality, localization. And part of the work we're trying to do as a tiny task force is looking at bringing out global, also more localized case studies, more localized examples to do exactly what you're asking. How to cement them and how to apply them in certain geographic locations and certain sectors that have applicability in its location.
Just to change what Kayla said, is we piloted a TNFD study in the mining sector, and I think if you had to try and follow the entire process, it's a very expensive, very long process. So what the part of the recommendations like to cherry pick, to say, right, we prioritize our operations within the lead process to say 3 operations which are material, and then to maybe just go into the E for the assess phase, and don't worry about the A and the assess, and say, in later years we will, as we develop, we will then look at that. Because the assess phase is quite an in-depth phase. Encore starts touching on a bit of the E, the A for assess, and it contributes to the E as the L as well. But it's really, thinking around scenarios and things like that, which is quite difficult at this point.
No, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so for this, for questions on this presentation, the timekeeper is saying no. So thank you very much to Candice and Thomas. Can we give them a round of applause? Okay, we are going to our third presentation. This is a joint presentation between Dr. Gaby Terran and Mr. Livuyo. So they will be presenting on corporate biodiversity accounting. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me? Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to StatsSA and to SANBI and to DFFE for hosting this. It's really a privilege to come after both Candice and Thomas and talk about the so what. At the end of the day, for businesses, we're from a conservation organization. Thank you. And I'm very pleased to be presenting here with the rock star of the NCA internship program. Very excited that we've been able to really develop these skills and use them. And what we want to talk about is the links between corporates and how we can use natural capital accounting to meet targets and to really make conservation work and improve biodiversity on the ground. So our role as a conservation NGO is improving habitats, protecting species, benefiting people. And we're going to split this up and talk about our work with businesses and go through a case study of using corporate natural capital accounting. And then I'm going to go into the business case of how we've been working with businesses to look at the opportunities to meet national targets. Just a bit of background into us. We were formed in 2013, a long time ago, having recognized that businesses weren't being directly involved in biodiversity conversations. It was all about climate change at that point, and so we've got levels of aspects of the work we do, from thought leadership pieces to doing biodiversity footprints, which is what we're going to talk about today, to involved at a global network and trying to get the African and South African case studies out there. We've done biodiversity footprints in Australia, Canada, North America, Brazil, Peru, Chile, South Africa, across the globe, and it's been really interesting to see the different approaches. And I'm going to be bringing some of those learnings through today in terms of data as well, some of the things we've been talking about. And why was this established? Companies, and we've been really hearing this morning about companies that are actively engaged and actively involved in biodiversity, which is fantastic. The reality is that most companies aren't sitting in this room, and most companies are still learning and trying to figure this out. And I think both Thomas and Candace showed the progression and the work that has to go into it. So before the Global Biodiversity Framework came out, we reviewed all of the JSE-listed companies, and less than a quarter of them had any mention of biodiversity in their policies and procedures. And this is really just raising awareness. But what I wanted to highlight is we've recently, this is very new work, done a case study of 5 of the corporates that are really involved in biodiversity in South Africa. And this, we looked at all of their sustainability reporting against the Global Biodiversity Framework targets, and we found that actually they are reporting on information directly related to those targets. They're just not packaging it in a way that actually informs the targets. So there's a lot of communication that needs to happen between businesses and conservationists and natural capital accountants and policymakers. So it is changing, and I'm really excited to be sharing some of the results with you today. And I'm going to hand over to Lavoyo to talk about our footprinting process. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Really glad to be back here on the stage, representing the youth again, and other aspects as well. So yeah, I'm going to be presenting the biodiversity footprint as well as the biological diversity protocol, which is short using BD protocol. So essentially, as Gabby mentioned, we've been working with corporates for quite a while with regards to mainstreaming biodiversity through footprinting work. So I thought it would be valuable to just firstly go back and revisit what biodiversity footprints actually are. Essentially, biodiversity footprint is essentially, it refers to the total impact of an organization, project, region, service, or product on biodiversity, both negative and positive. So I'm sure the room is quite familiar with that definition now. So in response to the need for rigor around any claims that are being said around footprints, I mean, companies throw around certain things about being positive and that kind of thing. There's a need for rigor for that. There's tools, the National Capital Accounting kind of framework and concept around accounting is very important in order to provide evidence to support those claims. One such tool is the BD protocol that we've developed. I think it was developed over 3 to 4 years, about 40 co-authors that went into that. We can see it, it's publicly available. So essentially, it just looks at, it's a tool, it's a framework that can help companies to essentially show their, enables them to account essentially for what they have and what ecosystems they have, essentially the impacts they've been having throughout their operations. So what does that look like? At the end, you can have things like performance statements, you can have things like position statements. It allows for transparency, accountability, and it's publicly available. Anyone can use it. Any one of these corporates can use it. So essentially, we're going to start at the end first. Let's talk about maps. Let's talk about pie charts. This is a pie chart, a very simple one, but it summarizes a lot of information behind it. It is a pie chart that can be given to a CEO, it can be given to stakeholders, shareholders, anyone, and it's simple enough for them to understand. But behind this pie chart is this particular one. There's about 1.5 years worth of work for footprinting. There's about 50, we're looking at 50,000 hectares, 44 ecosystems, 20 operations across 2 different countries for this particular corporate. This particular example is Sibanye's example they've disclosed. And this is their footprint at 2020 at acquisition. So this is the beauty of this. All of the information is summarized into something simple as this. So what is the process to get to that pie chart that you can give to a CEO? First of all, you set boundaries. This means essentially what are you looking at? Are you looking at direct impacts? Are you looking at indirect impacts? Are you looking at supply chain, downstream, whatever you're looking at? In this particular case, for ease, let's just look at the direct. Essentially, what do you have, what are you impacting within your site or whatever you own? And then you develop impact inventory. What is that? That is essentially what do you have within your boundaries, which ecosystems, which the different ecosystems, which species, and so forth. You then go on to assess the impacts. This is a bit of a process as well. You assess the state of nature within your direct operations. What is the condition? What is the condition of certain ecosystems in that? And that goes through the process of actually using different criteria to assess condition. We'll talk about that in a bit. Then, once you have the impacts, then you can measure the gains and the losses that you've had within a certain accounting period that you've chosen. Then we move on to building statements. This is essentially what you would equate to financial records that can be audited by auditing companies, but in this case, it's got no financial information, it's just information about biodiversity. And then validate, verify. As it suggests, it's essentially trying to make sure that all of the things that you have in your statements are a true reflection of what is actually happening on the ground. And then you report and manage. Report, that could be through disclosure and that kind of thing, and you put in place plans to actually manage in order to move forward in terms of your positive footprint. Once you've done that, you do it again. Great. And then you can start moving forward in terms of your goals and around targets and stuff. So here, this is just an example of that Sibanye one. This is a site in Marikana. As you can see, basically we've established what the boundaries are. We've established what ecosystems you have in there. The different ecosystems, that's the different colors. You have the Marikana, Thornveld, you've got the Mood Plains, essentially taking stock of what you have in there. A side note on this, we assess all of the ecosystems, but for species, we only look at material species because generally there's too many species to look at. It's very difficult to account for every kind of species that you could find. Sometimes there isn't even data on some species. So ecosystems are the way to go. I mean species as well, but yeah. Yeah, just a similar thing here, looking at the aquatic realm as well, because also there's different criteria to assess the condition of the aquatic realm. So yeah, we take stock of that as well. So the result of looking at assessing those impacts and condition, essentially, you now have this kind of thing, this kind of map. All of the white is essentially what's already been transformed. Those are zeros. You can see with the 0 there, that's white. That's built environment, that's your open pit mines. It's got no biodiversity value to some extent. And then you then get your 0. In this particular case, the maximum was 2. I mean, the 2 is a little bit better than the 1s and so forth. You get the drill. So, and this particular case wasn't necessarily high because the maximum was 2. And this criteria was from 0 to 6, which is where 6 is the reference state or the pristine state. So, yeah. And then from having that, then you can start measuring your gains and your losses within your accounting period. So the KPIs, the key performance indicators for this, we have the total biodiversity footprint. That is essentially what you have in your site. And then you have the positive biodiversity footprint, which is the sum of the surface areas adjusted for condition. And then when you take those two, the difference between those two is then your negative biodiversity footprint. Just to simplify that through an example, you have 100 hectares of forest, for instance, and then some forest guy who's a really nerdy and has been doing forest for a long time goes in and says to you, this is a 6 out of 10. It's a 6 out of 10. So what do you have then? You have 100 hectares of your piece of land. The condition is 6 out of 10. So what is your positive biodiversity footprint? It's 6 times 100 divided by the 10. So essentially, it's 60 hectare equivalents. The hectare equivalence just means the surface area adjusted for condition. And then obviously the difference between those two is your negative. Then all of that information can then be fed into journal entries. You can now have a statement of all of the different entries, what you've gained, what you've lost. You have a debit, you have a credit, and all of this is not money. All of this is biodiversity. Yeah, and then now you can start building your statements from those journal entries that you have. Now, what do you call it? It's biodiversity position, statement of position, which is essentially where you are at that point in time. It's essentially positive biodiversity plus your negative biodiversity footprint. And then you have also the impact statement of performance, which is how you have performed in that period. That is basically the gains minus the losses. Yeah, so you can do this for all of your sites. Let's say, for instance, you're some big mining company. You can do all of this for all your different sites, and then you have a nice list of your total, your positive, and your negative for each different site, and then you can aggregate that and have your nice pie charts that you can give to a CEO, a shareholder, or anyone that you would want to see that. Then that's when the decisions can start moving forward with regards to what now. Do we increase our 13.52%? What do you want to go to 15%? How do we do that? Then we go backtrack again. All of this information is back to the maps, which is basically polygons. All of this information can be backed up by the actual polygons that were scored in terms of condition. So yeah, that is the technical side of things. I'll hand over to Gabby for the business case.
Thanks, Livuyo. And so in that previous pie charts that Livuyo showed, the company had in fact gone down in its positive footprint. So it now needs to set targets and put actions into place to improve its positive impacts. And so why would companies want to do that? So this actually is a slide